Tomorrow, lawmakers on Capitol Hill are set to revisit a plan to require doctors to provide medical care to infants who survive an abortion. The Senate Judiciary Committee will hold hearings on the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act. The plan would require infants who survive an abortion be given the same care as any other newborn at that age. Lawmakers tried to pass the measure last year, but were unsuccessful. Joining us now is the bill's lead sponsor, Senator Ben Sasse, Republican from Nebraska. He has also backed a number of pro-life proposals on Capitol Hill. Senator Sasse, welcome back to our show.
Thank you, Tracy. Good to be with you.
Well, Senator, tell us specifically what's in the proposal and how it would protect abortion survivors.
You bet. So this legislation is just incredibly simple, and I think we should just start and say that, because people throw up a whole bunch of smoke and dust and nonsense and try to make it into something it's not. This bill says that a baby that survives a botched abortion should receive the same level of medical care that any other baby would get at that same gestational stage. There really shouldn't be anything controversial about this. This should already be the law of the land. This should be what the practice is in American life. And unfortunately, it's not the current case. And so we should pass this law, and we ought to do it 100-0 in the United States Senate.
Well, as you mentioned, you're the lead sponsor of this bill. Tell us why this is so important to you.
Well, I think that there's a bunch about the pro-life movement, which is wonderful, and I've been blessed to be a part of this movement since I was a kid. And Lindsey Graham sponsors the pain-capable pro-life bill in the Senate, and I'm an original co-sponsor of that as well. But every place across the life debate, there are lots of people who pay a little bit of attention, and then there are some places where people pay a lot more attention. And when you think about the case of a baby that survives a botched abortion, and we know from state level data that this happens in the procedure that's horrifically called backing away, where they take a baby that sometimes survives a botched abortion and they decide to not actively kill that little boy or that little girl by putting a pillow over the baby's face and snuffing its life out, but instead just backing away and letting it die by exposure. It's a horrific practice. Infanticide has obviously been a part of the evil histories of humanity going back for thousands of years, but it shouldn't be true among us. And yet that is one of the forms of death and killing that happens to babies that survive these botched abortions. And we ought to put an end to this horrific practice. And so this is one of the important places that we can love our neighbor and stand for life and talk about the dignity of everybody, including the most vulnerable, and that is those that have just been born and they need warmth and comfort and food and protection.
Well, Senator, the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act stalled last year. Can we talk a little bit about that, why it happened, and do you think it'll pass this time?
Thank you. So last year we were able to get a vote on this in the Senate about a year ago right now, or maybe 11 months ago. And a couple things to say that are good news before we get to the bad news of why it didn't ultimately become law. Good news, it got a majority of the Senate's votes. It was a bipartisan vote. And we had a president who was willing to and waiting to sign it. So that's all good stuff. The bad news is, as you well know, to pass something in the U.S. Senate doesn't just require a majority vote. It requires a 3/5 vote to end the debate and get to the place where we can finally take the final vote on passage. And we had enough Democrats who were willing to filibuster the bill that we didn't get to 60 votes. And that was after the disgraced governor of Virginia, Governor Ralph Northam, had made just these horribly debauched comments about whether or not a doctor and a baby's mother could let a baby sort of be kept comfortable while there was a decision made about whether or not to kill this baby. Just bizarre and horrific stuff. There was similar action that had moved in the New York state legislature, and so there was some public attention on the issue at that point, and we were able to get the bill to the floor of the Senate and again get a bipartisan vote and get a majority vote, and we had a president waiting to sign, but we couldn't get the bill ultimately passed because the Democrats decided to filibuster it. I hope that doesn't happen again. This should be, as we mentioned before, 100-0 vote. Again, I'm a very pro-life guy, but even people who don't agree with me on abortion and life issues ought to be able to agree that a baby that has already been born, a baby that's already survived an abortion attempt, deserves care, deserves protection, deserves warmth and comfort.
Well, Senator, quickly, I'd like to ask you, as we're going to switch gears a little bit. Last month, President Trump became the first sitting president to address the March for Life. Tell us what that meant to you personally, and also what you think it means for the pro-life movement.
Yeah, I'm so glad that the president went out and spoke at the march. I had the opportunity to welcome a lot of the Nebraskans to town who were here in D.C. to be a part of the march. And a couple weeks before, we'd done the Walk for Life, as we do in Lincoln around the unicameral every year. And one of the things that people who are regularly a part of the march and different walks for life that happen in 50 state capitals around the country know is that the vast majority of the pro-life movement isn't really primarily about legislation. Obviously, we're talking about legislation here today, Tracy. Legislation matters, but more fundamentally, the pro-life movement is about love of neighbor. The pro-life movement is about trying to win hearts and minds. We want to change laws, but what we primarily want to do is win hearts and minds. And seeing President Trump come out and address the March for Life was a really big moment in the last 4 decades and change of this movement, and I hope it becomes a thing that presidents future all feel a burden to be at this unbelievable outpouring of love and care and affection and concern for our neighbors, and especially the weakest and most vulnerable among us. So I applaud the president for having shown up and given a powerful speech.
Well, Senator, thank you so much. Senator Ben Sasse, Republican from Nebraska, thanks again for your time.
Thanks, Tracy.